Major Kira believes her mother died in the Singha Refugee Center. Ducat calls lilacs lilacs. And Kira says she's going to have to shower for a week to get the smell of that Leggett off of her. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Seventh Rule with Cirroc Lofton.
Oh, man. How are you, everybody?
My name is Ryan T. Husk. Today, we're doing a review of Deep Space Nine Season 6, Episode 17, Wrongs Darker Than Death or Night. This is written by Ira Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler. It's directed by, very interestingly, Jonathan West, who's a director of photography, amazing one. And this was April Fool's Day, April 1st, 1998. Whew, how you doing?
Doing good. Weather's been really nice out here. I don't know about your side of town, but it's been extremely warm.
It is windy today.
Is it?
Yeah, it's windy up here.
Yeah. No, it's been nice and warm. It's no wind, but just beautiful blue skies. So it's
Very
always
warm.
nice to enjoy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's always fun.
Yeah. So, boy, this episode, huh? This, one thing, let's just get out of the way at the very beginning here. One thing I noticed, because I remember this episode, I remember thinking, oh, God, Ducat's such a creep. But I always forget how great of an actor Marc Alaimo is, that every single line he says, to me, is like an acting clinic of like, there are no wasted lines. Make every line interesting. Don't take, like don't take any lines off. There's something you can do with each line that makes it more interesting or more disgusting or more surprising. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know. I never really forget about Marc Alaimo's talent and his ability, because I know that as soon as I see him, I get this kind of disgust in the bottom of my stomach. So I know he's effective at what he does. But actually, along those same lines, I was thinking about Odo on those same lines, because when the scene where Kira kind of comes in and she's having her little, she's kind of on edge and she's pissed off about what Ducat told her in that message.
Right.
When she comes into security and she's like, some shoplifting going on, I need to take care of that. I thought that Odo, Renee in this case, gave some very subtle moments where he was kind of registering her kind of disgruntled demeanor, and I enjoyed the reactionary shots from him that let me know that he was processing this information. So yeah, it just goes to, and it's just a small scene. I think there were just a few lines in it, one of which I really liked, when he says, you seem irritable. I see,
And be careful with that. Be careful with that.
Yeah, I see Bashir is not exaggerating. So when it was like a tough one, because he actually took a lot of nerve for him to say that in that moment. But ultimately, I thought there were moments in there where he wasn't being too judgmental. He wasn't being too upset about it. He was just the right level of taking note of something and seeing if there was something on his end that he could do to, get her mind off of it or talk about something. So just the subtlety in that performance, those are the kinds of things that I think you're talking about.
Yeah. In that one scene too, it was only one scene in a few lines, but I was nervous for Odo. I'm like, when somebody comes in and they're being unreasonably rude or, bitter about something, and you can usually tell, look, there's no way this person is this annoyed or this upset about this normal thing. You got to tread very lightly when you go, what's really bothering you? Because a lot of times they're not in the mood to be like, oh, thanks for asking. They're going to be like, shit, mind your own fucking nothing. I just really want you to do the freaking thing. And then later, when they're feeling better, they can come back and be like, hey, sorry, whatever. But I was like, look out, Odo. She's not afraid to beat someone up. We've seen her do it before.
Yeah. But there's also that element of the feelings that he has for her, right? Because we know that he has these deep-seated feelings for Kira, and even though they've kind of both agreed not to talk about it at this point, it feels like from that angle he was trying to reach her, like like somebody who really deeply, truly cares about you, and you know, in a personal way. So you feel like you have a license to do that because of the
Right.
feelings that you guys have for each other and the kind of understanding that you have.
And kudos to the character of Kira, specifically the character, to be able to take a beat, take a breath and say, okay, and like kind of take herself out of it and, be an adult about it. Because a lot of times we're not in the mood to talk about stuff or to open up, no matter how great of a friend that person is that's asking us. We're not always in the mood to be like, oh, well, thanks for asking. I'm glad you noticed that I'm very irrational and upset right now. I'd love to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually when you're in that kind of a mood, you don't want to talk.
Right.
But, I don't know about you, but the first thing I kind of thought about in the opening of this episode was, when was the last time I saw Ducat? Because I thought I saw Ducat kind of going crazy, and after Zial, he just kind of lost his mind.
Yeah.
And I thought he just went crazy and was in an insane asylum type of situation.
Yeah, you're right. And now that you mention it, it would have been nice for his present day, his call when he called her in, to reflect that a little bit, to show him, like, the fact that he's calling her and saying weird stuff, that demonstrates a little bit about him being weird, but that also is believable for previous Ducat. He loves to kind of needle her and whatever. It would have been nice to see something where he's tweaking, like he's scratching his shoulder, or he's looking over his shoulder, or although I did notice that he was very wet. Did you notice that? Like, very sweaty. I put that in my notes. I was like, why is Ducat wet? Like, he looked like he just got out of the shower. It's like, I just got to call her right now, because he was drenched. And I was thinking maybe it was just hot on set that day and the actor was sweating, but not really, because it was on the prosthetics. So I wonder if maybe that was kind of their way of showing, like, he's a bundle of nerves right now. I mean, everybody go back and watch that episode. When he's calling in, he's drenched like if he just spent a summer in California Central Valley. Like, he was hanging out in Bakersfield.
No, I didn't pay attention to that. I was kind of curious. I was actually looking in the background to see if there was something in the background that would signify where he was, like if he was in captivity somewhere in a cell. Right. But I think a little bit of background information would have helped me out in that moment. I would have liked to know, for example, if Ducat was seeing a therapist and the therapist was telling him that he had to resolve a lot of issues.
Interesting.
And this was one of the things that, he was being coaxed into doing, because it was part of his, rehabilitation process to get his sanity back. If that was explained to me, I would have been like, oh, that's perfectly logical for me, that he has to kind of make amends with all of these things, these demons in his head, and that would be one of them. But I was saying, where did I last see Ducat? And now he's like just popping up out of nowhere with some, I hooked up with your mama jokes. It's like, wait a minute, where did this guy come from? So that was a little bit hard for me in the beginning to kind of just process. But once I got over that and I accepted the premise that, okay, somehow he just got out a message from wherever he was and he had the urge to say this to Kira, I kind of accepted it and moved on. But it did have a little bit of, just a little hesitation for me to like, where is this guy coming from? Or is this a setup?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's funny because now everybody at home is going, God, I've watched this episode 9 times and I didn't think about that. Or some people are saying, yes, I've been saying that for 20 years, but to me, I'm like, oh yeah, I never even thought of that. That's a good point. Because when we last leave Ducat, when Sisko and him, kind of have that trial in the caves, we naturally expect, okay, next time we see Ducat, he's going to be crazy in some way, whether he's going to be extra ruthless or he's going to be shivering in a corner going, oh, Sisko, whatever. So there's going to be something different. There's going to be at least another layer to what he's doing. And his situation, like you said, maybe it's a therapist, maybe he's in a brig somewhere. Who knows what's going on? But you're right. Yeah, this next time we see him, there isn't any of that, or at least that we can see, but that's probably just because this was an episode that was planned out, back in season 4 or 5 or something. They just kind of were like, okay, how about right here? We just drop this one in, kind of one of those bottle type episodes that still do have some kind of implications on the character because, now Kira is going to move forward knowing this about her mom, maybe be a little bit more embittered, but also, have a little bit more of a nuanced approach to, how she feels about her family.
Yeah. And that was the other thing that was difficult for me is like, I don't know if I don't want to be there for any of that. Like if I could go back in time, I'm definitely not going back in time to, see what my mom was up to. I don't want to know. Just go ahead and, bypass that. But this was an interesting story in that, one thing that I think DS9 does so well with their villains is they give them these redemptive qualities. They give them these complex kind of storylines that make you root for people that you actually hate or see a different side of somebody that you have set in your mind. This is how they are, and they're I'm not changing. And in this case with Dukat, I was certain that he was playing the game. I was certain that he had some kind of extra, there was some other ulterior motive to what he was doing, especially when the other guy, who smell that Kira wanted to wash off of him.
I got the line right here. It is,
yes,
I only hope that you won't condemn us all for the boorish behavior of one man, which was brilliant because when he first says that, Kira looks at him like, what the hell are you talking about? And we're thinking like, what is he talking about? And then Dukat says it and we go, aha, yes.
Beautiful writing.
Perfect.
Love the way that kind of flowed. And then it made you say, oh, this guy's a creep. He's like all of this stuff is calculated. So even his pleasantries are calculated. Even when he's being good, he's actually has this, deceit and this, this other kind of motive behind what he's trying to do. So that was a great line and made you continue to doubt whether Dukat was sincere or not, right?
Yeah, and it was cool because, I mean, there's always that extra depth that we expect from Star Trek, and the writing is always great. And this is one of the reasons is because we already suspect Dukat, right? We already think his motives are not sincere. However, there's always that possibility. Like, for example, maybe, I mean, this was, 30 years in the past, maybe Dukat was sincere back then, and then something happened that changed him, or over time, we don't necessarily know, but we assume that all the worst things about Dukat, and the writers want to say, basically, for those of you that haven't caught on yet, yes, Dukat is still only having the worst of intentions, because some people might be like, oh, maybe, they want to make it clear in a very subtle and interesting way that Dukat is still a liar. He is still a manipulator. And Dukat, which is strange in this case, he's not in it for the sex. He's not in it for the comfort. He's in it for his ego. Like, he wants everybody to think that he is just this magnanimous hero. Like, for him, that's the game. The game is to have people love him. The game is to have his ego stroked. The game is to have mind power. He wants the mind fuck, And it's really interesting that's because he could just hump all those women there, right? He's this monster that can do whatever he wants, but that's not what he wants. He wants to get in their heads. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, but even in the course of doing that, he does do quote unquote good things.
Mm.
So I know it's hard, we look at the people's intentions too, but when somebody is doing good, even if they have bad intentions, you still have to give credit for the good, regardless of the fact that they have bad intentions. Um, I mean, fixing her scar, I thought was a poignant moment because that could have been an easy way for him to just discard her or say, or be angry with somebody and say, "How dare you let this person who doesn't meet my qualifications or who's defected, quote unquote, how dare you let them make the cut?" But instead, I thought he did show a little bit of a moment of a moment of compassion there. No, regardless of what the reason was, that scar was something that bothered her.
Yeah.
And it bothered her. It bothered her to the point where she covered it up because she felt uncomfortable for people to see it. So, um, relieving her of that anxiety is something that actually has value and should kind of be acknowledged. Now, are you doing it so you can later on do this and that? Well, yeah, but
Well,
uh,
yeah, and I submit that
yeah,
there wasn't 1 ounce of compassion from him when he did that. I believe that that's all part of the manipulation. That's all part of the game. That's all him trying to convince her. What? Ah, I am such a compassionate man. Don't never mind what you've heard. Look at me. I'm such a savior. I fixed your scar for you. I mean, it's this free thing. This thing, and she, and he's doing it to make her think, wow, he's not so bad. And clearly it worked, which is really, like taking this episode in a direction that I normally would have not expected. This is a much, much grayer episode. You would assume that the way this episode was going was that Kira would convince her mother that he's a monster and her mother would stand up for herself and good would prevail. But instead, it was Kira saying, she's basically dead to me. She's lost. She's been manipulated by him, and there's nothing I can do about it. And she was willing to kill her mother for it. Like, she was like, I would
yeah,
rather kill my mom than knowing that she lived out her days like this kind of life and desecrated my family and my father. And I mean, that there's a lot of gray in a lot of that. But I guess that's the whole tragedy of it all, is that when you have people beaten to submission so hard and so deeply that they're so desperate, they're hungry, they're sad, they have zero self-worth, they're broken, they're almost willing to believe anything. And anybody with this upper hand and with this control can have them do and say and think and believe things that they normally wouldn't. And that's what's so unfair about this, is the mind control. Because in Ducat's mind, he could say, oh, well, I didn't make her do anything that she didn't want to do. But we all know she wasn't in the position to make these kinds of rational decisions. She's a slave. She's beaten into submission. She's not in a position to make these decisions. And someone like him, what he's doing, he's a predator, and he's taking advantage of that vulnerability and of knowing that he can do pretty much anything to these people because they've their entire lives have been beaten into submission. It's a really god awful thing, but so beautifully portrayed by the writers and by the actors here.
yeah, and I think what it does, it brings up an interesting, kind of um, topic in which we discuss the element of survival.
Yeah.
And in Kira's mom's case, she is doing what she believes and what is for the benefit of her family's survival. Um,
Right.
she could resist. They could all resist, and then they could all end up dead. And there goes their whole existence. That whole family tree could
Including
get wiped
Kira.
out,
Yeah.
including Kira. They could
Norris,
all be wiped out. But if you look at it in the linear sense, because of what Kira's mom did, and even though there was 7 years of oppression for the Bajoran people, that she said she lived comfortably for 7 years while the Bajoran people were oppressed, right? And she felt a disdain for her mother for living that kind of lifestyle while her
right.
people were going through that. However, it is because Kira lived that the resistance ended up having the people that it needed to then overthrow and fight the exact occupation that she's upset about. So the survival of the people ensures the survival of the fight or the resistance.
Right.
And so you need that. Right.
Right. And that's why Kira's mom is doing what she's doing in her mind, and rightly so. She's doing something for the greater good. Now she's losing a piece of herself. She's losing all of her dignity. She's losing all of her, honor. She's losing, everything, basically, who she is as a person. But the big picture is, and people have done this since the beginning of time, where they say, they sacrifice whatever it is for what they believe to be the bigger picture. And she's saying, if I basically convince myself that this guy's good and do whatever is whatever, then my family is living comfortably. And that's why they added that scene where her husband's calling in. And that was a little hard to swallow too, is the husband calling in and be like, oh, life is so great. And this, I think a husband would probably be a little bit more like, doesn't matter what these guys do or help us with, we want you back. This is horrible. We would rather live the rest of our lives in caves than to not have you in our lives. But, again, it just goes to show when you've got people beaten into submission, they're willing to believe almost anything for, like what you're saying, survival.
Yeah, but I thought that was an interesting scene too, because it actually showed that Dukat kept his word.
True.
Because, he could have easily just sent the family off into a camp and said, banish them or they die too.
Right. And then just telling her, oh, they're doing just fine. Believe me.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, once again, there are redemptive qualities to Dukat. I know that, all of the things that you laid out very eloquently about being in a position in which you don't have any options or choices or any real true choices or options. It's, between the lesser of two evils in those kinds of scenarios. However, because things are complicated, because Dukat is not he still has to answer to people. He has to answer to his race of his Cardassian upbringing.
Typical middle management. He's got middle management energy.
Well, yeah, he does, and so things are complicated. It's not just a black and white issue. It's not like Dukat just puts his thumb up or thumb down and the war is over and everything goes back to normal. It doesn't all rest in just one person's hand like that. And so I do believe then. So when you're faced with that, then you have issues in which, are you going to be ruthless about carrying out your orders and carrying out whatever agendas in front of you? Or are you going to be compassionate about carrying out your deadly orders or ruthless orders? So there's the approach there, and there is discretion in those kinds of moments. And I think we see that regardless of whether you like the position of hierarchy that he's in, he still, one, keeps his word. Like he said, I'm going to take care of your family. They won't have to worry and struggle, which is evident by Kira's, upbringing. She's alive and she's well. We know that things worked out for her. So he kept his word on that. He also,
Wait, hang on. Before you hit the other point on that, let's take our quick break. But I know there's another half to that. Super quick break. We'll be right back on this meaty, juicy episode of The Seventh Rule.